what do you guys think the axis would be? What do you guys think the stationary
Greater
movable
trochanter.
Yes.
Huh?
What? The eighth.
Greater trochanter, because we're going to be
Oh.
on lateral flexion, hip flexion.
Hip flexion
Okay.
first.
Hip flexion. For hip abduction, adduction, and adduction, it is the ASIS. For internal and external rotation, it's a little different. It's the knee, and I'll show you guys that. It's really weird. And then for extension, we would just put them in prone and use the exact same spot, the greater trochanter. All right. For the stationary, we're going to line it up. If we're going, go ahead, lay down. If we're going to bend your knee. If we're going to do hip, you've got the stationary lined up mid-line with the trunk, okay? And the greater trochanter, fine, right there. Okay, so we're here. I'm lined up parallel to the mid-line of the trunk, or you can just say parallel with the table, whatever works for you guys. And then your movable is going to be the midline of the femur all the way to the lateral epicondyle of the femur, and you're going to have the patient bend their knee as far as they can, or I'm sorry, their hip as far as they can. You're going to keep this
I got stuff in the way.
where it's supposed to be.
Big fat nose.
We went from 0.
Yeah, organs in there.
We went from 0 to
This is what's gonna happen with your patients too.
97. So if you wanted to do that's active, if you wanted to do passive, we could push more, and then we can make sure that it's lined up. And now we can tell you that we went to 101. Okay, so that was hip flexion. Again, greater trochanter is the axis, and then midline of the trunk is the stationary, and the movable end is the femur. So, for you can just stay right there.
Okay.
For abduction, you'll want to have them go as far over to this side of the table as you can.
So
And
you
you're
can have
doing-
that, your other leg.
Right. And then we're doing the ASIS. So we found it here. All right. Stationary is going to be actually across the body, an imaginary horizontal line towards the other ASIS. So that's why I palpated both, because I know now that that needs to be right there. And when she comes to bring her leg out, know that your pelvis will come up. It's just natural. You want to make sure that you're still in that line. So sometimes it may shift down. It's not going to be directly horizontal. Okay? So when she brings her leg out, make sure the toes stay up, because if you rotate the toes outward, you can get more abduction because you're using you're compensating in the hip.
And you're
So make sure-
externally rotating.
So make sure that she stays with the toes towards the ceiling. Your movable is going to be the midline of the femur on the anterior aspect. And we, again, ASIS, now it's here. So I just move it just a little bit. The difference between this one, the position where the goniometer starts, we started in 90 here. If you noticed, this is a 90-degree angle. That's your 0. Okay, so we zero it out.
I'm glad you're telling them that. They'll be confused about that.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So we started at 90, but that's 0. Okay, there's red numbers on the goniometer as well. That it shows 0 if you guys wanted to come look. Because it looks like I'm in 90 if I look at the black numbers, but if I look at the red numbers, it's 0. Then I go out, here's the midline of the femur, towards the patella, we went 20 degrees, okay? Now for abduction, it's the same thing, same landmarks exactly, but now you're gonna scoot towards me, because we're gonna measure the right side, so scoot towards me. And what you do with the opposite leg is move it out of the way. Now they can adduct, so we can bring the other leg in. So again, ASIS, there. Now again, we're starting at 90, which is our 0. You're gonna have her come in without twisting and laterally flexing the trunk. We're not
bringing your
compensating.
back, yes, bringing
Okay.
your back up, arching
Yeah.
your back.
So then we go in again.
That's all I got.
There you go. We went from 0 to 16. Okay. Your ab and adduction isn't a lot. So they're hip flexion, hip AB, and adduction. If you want to lay on your stomach,
Okay,
You
there's
can
some
do-
towels up there if you need one.
extension so far we're good. So this one is really hard to measure, especially if your patient has hip issues. I don't like the way that the book shows this, but this is what I taught my students as well. for hip extension, can you imagine trying to hold your leg up while we're measuring hip extension? It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know if I can do that.
That's actually like a workout.
Exactly, yeah. You're getting, yes, your butt muscles are working. So I prefer to measure them in sideline, but I only showed my students this one because this is the way that our licensure does it. So I'm gonna show you it. It's the exact same thing. We've got the same landmarks, like I said. Stationary is gonna be midline of the trunk. Okay, movable is gonna be the midline of the femur. We've got the greater trochanter. Okay. All right. So we're here, either parallel to the table or with her trunk. And this is where you have to get really good, because when you tell your patient to go, you really need to get it. So go ahead and lift your leg up and
You're
hold.
gonna have to be fast.
Go, hold. All right, so we're midline of the femur.
You got this, Miss Wilkerson.
I got about 6 degrees, which is pretty good. All right, so we'll sit up for hip internal and external rotation. This is the only one that's really, really weird. So whenever we're here, obviously we can measure hip internal and external rotation in like supine, where they're laying and you would do it this way, but now you'd be at the heel and you try to be measuring this way. It's really weird. This is also kind of an interesting way. So if we're looking at the knee for hip internal and external rotation is going to be where the knee goes out, right? We understand that? Okay, internal is when it goes in. Now notice that she's hiking her hip, so we look for substitutions. We make sure that they don't do that. So we'll measure external rotation first. Your axis is going to be the middle of the patella, all right? And your stationary is going to be perpendicular to the floor. Because notice whenever they move, she's gonna move here, my stationary should not move. So I'm going perpendicular to the floor. If you wanted to, you could go perpendicular to the ceiling. I think that's a little bit harder for you to pay attention to, so I do it to the floor. The movable is going to be in the anterior aspect of the tibia, right in the middle of it. So palpate the knee bone right there, and I'll go with the floor here. Go ahead and relax your leg. Okay, so I have found the tibia, I have found the midpoint of the patella. This stationary does not move, and you're going to externally rotate your hip without hiking. Okay, there you go. And I started at 0, and I went to, what did I get? You okay?
I'm just sweating.
31 degrees.
It's hot in here.
It is a little warm. So it's 31 degrees of hip external rotation, and then we're gonna do the same thing, same landmarks, nothing changes when you do internal rotation. So we're perpendicular to the floor, but notice that this moved over here. So I'm gonna do that. Keep it perpendicular to the floor. Make sure that I'm palpating the tibia. And we went from 0 to 10, 20, 30, 35. Okay? Good? Good?
Mhm.
Yes?
It's probably the easiest one.
I think I might mix up between internal external rotation. It looks.
Think about your hip, not your knee.
Oh,
Because you're doing hip, so when you're internally, your hip's internally rotating inward. So even though your knee's following it,
Oh,
but your
student
foot's
there.
kicking out, so don't look at your foot.
I try to look at the knee if we're sitting. Okay? If we're sitting, when you do hip external rotation, your knee is pointing out. Okay?
Away from midline.
Mhm.
This is
When you
towards
do
midline.
in, the knee is moving in. Alright? Now, when you're standing, it's different because now I look at the toes. This is hip external rotation. This is hip internal rotation. Notice what it's doing in your hip. Okay? It's different when you're sitting, and that's why it can be confusing. So make sure that you guys know what to look at when you're in what position. If you're sitting down, like right now, what am I doing to my hip? Internal?
External.
Okay? So if I were to be doing it like this, my knee is now in. Alright? Notice the difference in the positions. So, do you want me to keep going, or do you want them to work on that stuff first?
Yeah, let's work on that first, and then if anybody has any questions, and then we'll move on. She's gonna show how to do manual muscle testing as well. Okay, grab a Goniometer.